Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're continuing with our series of YouTube videos to help you play chess better. I thought today we'd talk about tactics used in a defensive sense. We know what tactics are for offense. A tactic on offense is a forced sequence of moves that wins material or checkmates. But in a sense, tactics are just as important, if not more important, on the other side, because you don't want to lose your pieces either. So any moves where you prevent your opponent from winning pieces or checkmating you can be thought of as a defensive tactic. So while we have sequences that win material, we also have sequences where you can find it so that you don't lose material. I call those defensive tactics. So I thought we'd show a whole bunch of different ones today, and I thought I'd start with a really easy one. Let's look at the Steinitz variation of the Ruy Lopez. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, d6, main move is d4. Now the main moves for black are either bishop d7 or e takes d4. Suppose black plays bishop e7. All right, so the offensive question is, can white win a piece? And the defensive question would be, if white can't win a piece, why not? Again, like a lot of the other videos, if you want to try to solve the puzzle before I give the answer, simply pause the video. And when you're satisfied with your answer, continue. So the question is here, can white win a piece? And if not, why not? Well, the only move that might win a piece is we have the knight pinned to the king. And we can play d5. And now the knight can't move because it's pinned to the king. But what can black do? Well, black can counterattack the bishop. He can play a6. If white says, okay, I'll keep the pin on the knight so I can try to win it, black will counterattack the bishop again. And now if the bishop moves back to b3, black will save the knight. Now, can white try to win a pawn since he can't win a piece? Could he play something like bishop takes c6, check, b takes c6, d takes c6? Yes, he could, but this pawn on c6 is very weak, and black has the bishop pair, so black's in no big danger here. Similar thing if white plays bishop to a4 and black plays b5 and white plays bishop takes b5. Again, black can just play a takes b5, d takes c6, and black's doing okay. So the answer is no. White cannot win a piece, and the defensive tactic is to counterattack with a6. This is very common. Now suppose black had played a5 instead of bishop e7, and now white plays d5. Does black have a defensive tactic now to save the piece? And the answer is no. There's no counter tactics for black here, and black's going to lose a knight for a pawn. Okay, let's take a look at some more. Let's take another look at one that's relatively well-known and fairly easy. Number 147. Okay, so it's black's move, and black plays rook on g6 to f6 to threaten white's back rank. And the question is, what's white's best defense here? What should white do in this position? Again, if you want to do it before you hear the answer, stop the video, and start it again when you're ready. Well, the right answer for white is the best way to defend this position is to go up a queen with d takes c5. If black plays rook f1 check, you would not play fast and play rook h takes f1. That's going to get you checkmated. Instead, you play the very common defensive idea, rook to e1, the only other legal move. And the two rooks guard each other on the back rank right through that black rook. And white has just won a queen, and that's certainly the best way to stop any back rank problems that you would have. So the right answer after rook on 6 to f6 is, thank you very much for the queen. Check, do not take that rook, you'll get checkmated. Rook e1, thank you black for allowing me to take off your queen. Okay. Let's try number 307. Okay. It's not the right problem. Hold on a sec. Okay, yes, I had the right problem. I just didn't go to the end of the sequence. All right, so here black is threatening king to b2, winning the rook, and that passed a pawn is a big danger. So this is a lot harder than the previous problems. This is white to play and save the game with a defensive tactic. What can white do here to save the game? Not easy. See if you can take your time, figure this one out. All right, the only move that saves the game is, believe it or not, bishop to b1. Why is that? Well, what white's threatening to do here is just trade his bishop for that dangerous pawn and go down a rook and a bishop versus a rook and a pawn. If black plays a takes b1 queen, rook takes b1. Let's say black plays bishop to d3 hitting the pawn. White can just put his rook behind the pawn. If black comes back with the rook and white pushes the pawn, black blocks the pawn, and we have a kind of a famous king, and even if black wins that g-pawn, the game is a draw. What else can black do? Well, he could play king b2 anyway. Do you see how white can still draw on king b2? What he's going to do is he's going to play bishop takes a2. If now bishop takes a2, then rook to g1 again with a draw. If black plays rook takes a2, then rook takes, bishop takes, and we have a draw. If black plays king takes a1, then bishop takes c4, and the bishop and the pawn will easily draw against the rook. So the only defensive line here for white to save the game is this kind of pretty counter-sacrifice. The idea being the bishop is worth way less than the pawn. If white tries anything else, any other move other than bishop b1, you can check it with the computer, then black's going to win. So that's a tough one. All right, let's try another one. Okay, this is another one that's a little tricky. Black is up 2 bishops, and it's his turn, but white has all kinds of threats, starting with queen takes e7 check. For instance, if the bishop just moves somewhere, bishop h4, then queen d7 is checkmate. So this is black to play and save the game. So what would you do here for black to save the game? Black to play and find a defensive maneuver, or a defensive tactic if you want to call it that, to save the game. What can he do? Well, all right, again, if you could stop the video if you want. Suppose black tries something like king to c8, then white's just going to play queen e8 check, and if bishop d8, queen d7 check, king b8, queen takes b7 mate. If white plays queen check and black plays king c7, then just rook checks, king d6, queen mate. So king to c8 doesn't work. It just puts off your misery for a move. The only defense, and again, this is not trivial to see, is queen e1 check, king b2, queen to b4 with a sneaky pin. Charles Hertan calls these moves where pin pieces can't take off things sneaky pins. And now the queen is guarding the bishop. And if white plays a move like queen g8 check, king d7 hits the queen. If queen takes a8, hoping for bishop takes, pawn takes queen, black throws in a little Zwischenzug, queen c4 check. If king b1, then bishop takes. And if b3, then queen checks, king a1, and bishop takes a8 again. So after queen e1 check, king a2, queen b4, white doesn't have anything. If white moves the king out of the way to try to threaten to take the queen, now the queen has a square to guard the bishop, queen d6, and black wins. So the only way to defend this position is to see this sneaky pin way of guarding the bishop here. Not easy to do, but again, these defensive tactics are tough. By the way, I wrote a book called Back to Basics Tactics, and the first edition had a few errors in it in 2007, and we cleaned it up a lot in 2011. And then a few weeks ago, I learned that we have a third printing of the book. They're not different editions. They all have the same material. It's just that they kept fixing more and more things to make it cleaner and cleaner. And I just found out that we came out with a 2018 printing of the book, which is even cleaner. And so Back to Basics Tactics. And in my book, I try to cover all kinds of tactics. So I have an entire chapter called Defensive Tactics, where I show you a bunch of examples, and then I give you, let's see, how many problems in this chapter? 31 defensive tactic problems. Okay, let's put up another one. Let's try number 136. All right, this one's a little easier. Okay, this is black to play and get his piece back. So what's happened in the opening here is white has captured a knight on c6, and it's black's turn, and he has to be able to get his piece back. Now, if you've never seen a tactic like this, a defensive tactic, this one is very common. You'll see it come up quite a bit in a variety of openings. So it's a really good one to know. It's not just something that would only occur in this position. So it's black to play and get his piece back. If you learn this little defensive tactic, it's very, very helpful. Okay, again, you could stop the video if you want to try to solve it. Let's show what doesn't work. Well, clearly just taking the knight doesn't work because white can play check. Bishop takes c6 check, and no matter how black gets out of check, white can play bishop takes a8, and if black threatens the rook on f1, now white's up an entire rook. He can afford to give back the exchange. He can play something like queen to e2. So that doesn't work. If black just plays bishop d7, then white will play knight d4 guarding the bishop. And if black tries to remove the guard with c5 or bishop c5, then white will check first. And then he'll save the knight, and he'll still remain up a piece. If black plays a6, bishop a4, and then b5, that gets the bishop off the diagonal, but now the knight's free to move. If black tries to trap it with, say, a move like bishop c5, white has a lot of different moves he could do. He could probably play d4. Let's ask the computer what the best move is. Yes, the computer says d4 here. And it says if bishop h3, then queen e2 again, and white's winning. So that doesn't work either. What black needs to do is combine those two ideas of bishop d7 and a6. What he does is he plays a6 first. Clearly, if white moves the knight discovered check, black will simply take. If white plays knight takes b5, black can play a move like bishop d6 and get his piece back. But if bishop a4, instead of playing b5, now you pin the knight. Now the knight has nowhere to go to guard the bishop. So that's the key. The key is first hit the bishop so it's not on a square the knight can guard, and then pin the knight to the bishop. So again, the answer is a6, bishop a4, bishop d7. And not only is black getting his piece back, but in this position, according to the computer, black has an advantage of about 1.4 pawns, which is pretty much winning. Okay, let's pick out a couple more. All right, so this is black to move, and white has just played a move like queen to d2, attacking the knight on h6 twice. All right, so the question is, can black save the knight? Because if black, right now black's up a pawn, but if he loses the knight for nothing, then he'll be down a piece and he could practically resign. Is there any way that black can save the game here? Black to play and not just lose an entire knight. Okay, again, if you want, you can pause the video, try to figure it out. Well, the answer is, the first move is to play queen to b6. Now if bishop takes h6, bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, black will have queen takes b2 check, hitting the king and the knight, double attack. And when white gets out of check, black will take the knight and remain ahead a couple pawns. Suppose after queen b6, white says, well, that's very nice, but you haven't saved the knight yet. I'll just save my pawn with rook on a to b1. What are you going to do now? Well, now that black has a queen on b6, he can play the sacrifice g5. And after bishop takes g5, he now has two pieces guarding the knight, and he will not lose a piece. So black has to give his pawn back to play g5 in order to save the knight, but that's a lot better than losing a piece. So that's the thing that you have to do. Now suppose you change the move order here and play g5 first. Bishop takes g5, then queen b6. Pretty much the same thing. So if you came up with g5 first, followed by queen b6, that's pretty much the same answer. Very good. All right, let's throw up another one. 149. Okay, this is another difficult one. Black is threatening queen h2 check, among other things. So it's white's turn, and white needs to defend the position. What can white play that will save the game here? This one's a little tougher, so again, if you want to try it, pause the video, take your time, see what you can do. Okay, well, if white just moves the bishop to guard the square, the problem is he's got the e4 pawn in trouble also. So let's say he plays bishop d3 to guard the pawn and let the rook guard the mate. That looks like a very reasonable move. That looks like the kind of move that I might play. What would black do then? Well, the problem is now black can play queen f3 check, not only forking the bishop, but the king can't stay on the h file. He has to go to the g file or put the rook in the way. Let's say he puts, well, if he goes to the g file, clearly rook takes g4 is going to lead to mate. So let's say he plays rook to g2. Black can play h3, threatening queen takes g2 mate again. Queen checks, the king runs away. Queen checks again. King runs away. Queen guards the mate. Pawn takes check. King g1, rook takes h2. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Meant to grab the rook, not the edge of the board. Rook takes h2, and black's winning. So bishop d3 doesn't work. Well, what does work? Bishop d3 doesn't work. Moving our bishop to a different square, let's say we play bishop f1. Black has a couple of ways of winning here. The computer says the best way for black to win is to play h3. Queen takes check again, and queen takes c7 this time, and he's winning. But what else can white do? Well, suppose he plays, I don't know, just rook to e1 to guard the e pawn. Then queen f3 check, king g1, rook takes g4 check, leads to mate again. See, that's the problem with moves like bishop f1, is once black plays here and stops white from putting a piece on g2, white has no defense. If he plays rook takes c6, of course, queen h2 is mate right away. So as I said, this is very tricky, very hard. The only defense is to play e5 and block the line. Now you might say, well, what good does that do? Black can just take it off. Well, but if he takes it off with the pawn, it blocks the queen and the bishop from threatening mate. If he takes it with the queen, the bishop can now go to f3. And now is not only is the rook guarding the mate, but the bishop's guarding the long diagonal also. So a move like h3 doesn't do anything. White will just take the knight and say, thank you very much for your pieces. So what else could Black do after e5? If he plays knight takes, White could play rook c7 check, which the computer says is winning. The best move, according to Stockfish, which I'm sure I wouldn't find, is rook to f1. And White is up by 5 pawns after queen takes a4, rook c7 check, king f8, rook takes f6, threatening rook on c takes f7 check. So back to the game again. So the only move to save the game, Stockfish says this move is 0, 0, 0. Every other move is at least minus 11, minus 10. So that's not an easy idea. These defensive ideas can be just as hard as offensive ideas. You know, very often you see moves like e5 is to start a brilliant attack. Here e5 starts a brilliant defense. Same kind of thing. You're using the same tactical abilities to do things on defense, to deflect him, to throw him away, to cover lines. You're doing all kinds of things that are the kind of the opposite of what the offense will try to do to create these lines and create these attacks. Okay, let's see here. Let's try number, did we do 291? Let's try that one. Yes, we did. We did that one. Let's try number 248. Okay, this is White to play and stop queen to g2 checkmate. Well, if you pick the knight e3 move, that will stop queen g2 checkmate for a move. The problem is that Black will now play king g7, and he's not only up the exchange in 2 pawns, but he's got a murderous attack. So yes, you are stopping the mate on g2, but it's not the best way to stop the mate on g2. The only other way to stop the mate on g2 is much, much better. And here your defensive move is also an offensive move. What you do is you take advantage of the sneaky pin of the f7 pawn with the bishop, and you guard the g2 square with queen takes g6 checkmate. So here we have an offensive tactic that also serves as a defensive tactic. You know, queen g6 checkmate wins the game. Knight e3 stops checkmate for one move, but it loses the game. So there's 2 ways to stop the checkmate, and checkmating Black is the best way to do it. I guess we have time for one more. Let's see. Let's try number 233. Okay. Actually, I have time for 2 more. Maybe I could squeeze in number 1 more. Okay. All right, so this is Black to play, and what should he do about the pin on the knight? He's got 2 pieces guarding it, and there's 3 pieces attacking it. Queen a4, bishop b5, rook d1. If Black does nothing, then just bishop takes d7, bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, wins the piece. All right, the red idea is to actually force the bishop to take the knight now. Play a6. If White plays bishop takes d7, now play b5, removing the guard from the d7 square. The queen has no safe square to guard it. For instance, if White now plays bishop takes b5 with the discovery on the queen, Black just plays e takes b5, taking back the bishop. If White takes Black's queen, Black will take White's queen, and so on. On the other hand, if the queen goes over to f4, here Black can take advantage of the fact that the bishop is now pinned to the rook and play rook to a7, threatening rook takes d7, and he'll get his piece back with about an equal game. So the right answer is a6, bishop takes, d7, b5, and black's okay. All right, let's throw one last one in there. We have time. Number 143. These are all out of my library. All right, this is black to play and try to not lose everything here. So right now he's got a bishop that's pinned to his king and it's attacked by a pawn. What can black do? Black to play defensive move. All right, I assume you know by now to stop the video, to hit the pause if you want to try to solve it. The answer is black should castle queenside. If white now takes the bishop, black will take the rook. If white plays bishop a6, black will take the rook again. Bishop takes. If white saves the rook, then black will save the bishop. Let's say, what's the best way to save the bishop? Well, let Stockfish tell me. Bishop takes d3 check, he says, is the best, with about an equal game. Okay, now, two things about this problem. One is the International Convention for Problem Solving says if the position looks like you can castle, then unless you can use retrograde analysis to prove that the king or the rook has priorly moved, then you're allowed to castle. This is exactly the opposite of en passant. If the position looks like you might be able to play en passant, then you cannot play en passant unless you can prove that the last move was that the opponent pushed the pawn up 2 squares. So basically what the convention says is if it looks like you can castle, unless you prove you can't, that castling is already illegal, then castling is legal. And if it looks like you can play en passant, but you can't prove that the last move allows you to play en passant, then you can't play it. So in this position, it looks like black can castle queenside. The convention is, since we can't prove that he can't, then he can. So therefore, castle queenside is legal. The second question is, the rook is going over an attack square. Is that legal? And the answer, of course, is yes. Your rook can move out of attack. It can move through attack when you're castling. But the king can't move out of check, through check, or into check. Well, here, when black plays castle queenside, his king is not in check. He's not moving through check. He's not moving into check. So the fact that the rook is moving through an attack square is quite okay. And that's the only way to defend the problem. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed these defensive tactics. If you want more, there's several books that have defensive tactics. You could probably Google defensive tactics. I think Susan Polgar's tactics book has a chapter on defensive tactics. My book, Back to Basics Tactics, as I mentioned earlier, chapter 5 is defensive tactics. But you're always using defensive tactics in chess, sometimes even more than you're using offensive tactics, because your opponent can threaten to do something, and maybe you have ways to stop him, but you have to be very clever about it, and you have to take your time and play good defense. And generally, of course, you want to make sure you have these ideas before he makes the threats. If you wait till after he makes the threats and then you find these defensive ideas, then you're being lucky. And we don't want you to be lucky. We want you to be good. So we want you to say, hey, if I make this move and he makes this threat, on the next move I'll be able to do this, this, and this, and I'll be okay. That's playing real chess. If you don't and you just make a move and your opponent makes a threat and you go, uh-oh, what do I do now? That's hope chess. And if you play hope chess and you have a defense, you're just lucky. But that's not how good players play chess. Okay, for Dan Heisman, this is my YouTube series. We'll talk to you later. If you enjoy the series, please recommend it to your friends. You can subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.